Good afternoon. This is very exciting for me. My name is Judy Marks, and I am both the founding director of the Atlanta Jewish Film Festival and very proud founding director, and currently the volunteer co-chair for community engagement for the Atlanta Jewish Film Festival. This is very exciting for me. We are delighted to have with us co-creator, producer, and writer Alexa Karolinski. You will be able to ask questions by the handful let me just tell you a little bit about the format. What we'll do is do a little bit of introduction, and then down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little function that says Q&A. And you can submit a question, and then in a little bit, we'll take some questions that are going to be moderated by the film festival staff and send them on, and we'll have a chance to have that conversation with you. This is part of the film festival's, I guess, response or programming during the current situation. This is our In Conversation. This is, I think, the second webinar that we've done like this. There's also AJFF Recommends, talking about what's out there for you to watch. That's part of our repertoire, and also playback, an opportunity to see films that we've shown in the past. So all of that information is available on the film festival website, ajff.org. I encourage you to check it out. And be aware that in the conversation there may be some spoilers. There may be some, if you haven't seen the whole series, first of all, I recommend get on it, do it, it's excellent. Second of all, anything we say probably will not, hopefully will not ruin your experience, because it's wonderful, and even the conversations that we have should enhance your viewing. So with that, wow, Unorthodox. What a show, what a reaction. Alexa, tell us a little bit about how it came to be, a little bit about why, Deborah's memoir, and how you ended up here today, I guess.
Yeah. So I'm from Berlin, and I work there quite a bit, and Anna Winger, who I created the show with, and I were in the talks of making something together. And around the same time, we met Deborah Feldman, who lives in Berlin, though she came to Berlin under very different circumstances than our Esty did in the show. She lives in Berlin, and her kids go to the same high school as Anna's kids. It's at the American High School in Berlin. And Anna gave me Deborah's book, kind of just saying, a mom at my school wrote this book, and she lives in Berlin. And I was like, wait, and a woman who fled her Hasidic upbringing wrote this best-selling book and lives in Berlin? I don't believe it. And I inhaled the book, and the three of us became friends. And that's kind of how this show started. Of course, Anna and I were inspired by the book, meaning we changed a lot from the book with Deborah's blessing. And Deborah is my age, and I mean, she already has a 13-year-old son, but it was very important to kind of keep her privacy and the life she leads now. We didn't want to tell her life now in Berlin. So we built this kind of story around her leaving and why she leaves. And of course, enabled characters like Moishe to exist, to come after her and bring her back.
So the story diverges from Deborah's memoir basically when she gets on the plane, right? I mean, she doesn't have there are differences in the story, and you did that to protect Deborah's life now.
We did that to protect Deborah's life now, as well as when you adapt a book, especially a memoir, you're in someone's head. Right. And if you did a literal adaptation of a memoir, you'd have a silent heroine watching things. That's basically what a memoir is. Like, some of the best memoirs are the thoughts as somebody takes in the world. In order to externalize the character, you need to create other characters and plot. And I feel like Anna and I just kind of ran with it with Deborah's blessing. I mean, I think the biggest change, in my opinion, other than the entire Berlin plot and characters, is the fact that Deborah, of course, is a writer, and Esty on our show is an aspiring musician. So that was a big change. Though after we made that change, we did find out that Deborah, in fact, did take secret piano lessons. So I feel like even though it's not in the book Unorthodox, it's true to the spirit of her. But
Well,
yeah.
I think the creativity, the need to express some of that creativity is the parallel to that. So Alexa, I mean, you just the idea that I think I read that you wanted your cast to be Jewish. Was that hard to cast in Berlin, or I mean, because you didn't use, I don't think, American. You couldn't find American Jewish actors, or didn't that there was some necessity to have Jewish actors.
Yes, that was very important to me because, in Germany, there's a long history of making films about Jews and the Holocaust and Jewish history by non-Jewish directors with non-Jewish actors and writers. And of course, growing up in Germany, I felt very close to a lot of these films, but not necessarily represented. And in making Unorthodox, it was, it's like doubling down on it. Not only is it about Jews, but it's about Hasidic Jews in Williamsburg. And the thought to me that non-Jewish German actors would play Hasidic Jews in Williamsburg in German
Yeah.
felt so double wrong to me. um so we actually casted, I mean, first of all, we saw as many, like basically all Jewish actors of all ages in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. And that was like a total of 40, I think. And so, but we opened the net a bit in New York and London, and some in Eastern Europe, and of course Israel. And that's how we kind of brought the cast together. It wasn't as much as that we didn't want American actors, as that this was not a huge budget production, and we couldn't have brought a lot of people from New York, but we did bring a couple of American, like Ellie Rosen, who was our Yiddish translator, consultant, coach. He ended up playing the rabbi too. Like, he's American, we had some American Jews there too. Just, we tried to stick as much to Europe and Israel as possible, for almost like mostly for budgetary reasons, actually.
One of the things that really struck me about the show, particularly in the beginning, and this is before we get to know Moshe well, was that there doesn't seem to be a villain. That the Satmar, that you were sort of very sensitive to that as a way of life, and I was really struck by that. I thought, because tuning in, the immediate response of a non-religious American Jewish person is the Orthodox, the Satmars are going to be the enemy here. They're going to be the villain. And they really, Yankee particularly is not a villain. He's and played very, sensitively. The reaction to that, I think, has been really interesting. I was just wondering, I've seen some chatter in the Orthodox world that there are things that they didn't get right, but then there are a lot of chatter saying how much you did get right. And I was wondering if that you're surprised at some of these reactions.
Well, I have to say that we built Moishe largely inspired also by Jeff and his actual real stories from his childhood and leaving the community and engaging with people similar to Moishe. Of course, he represents many different kinds of people at once. To me, I don't see Moishe as a pure villain. I see him as a really troubled guy who is not capable of living inside that world or outside that world. And I do feel for him. I mean, it's not an entire community or people is not a villain. Like, that would be really wrong and propagandistic to do that. We tried very hard to, that world works for a lot of people as well. To say that world is awful for everyone would feel wrong. And we tried very much to show also Estes' growth, and like when Estes gets married, she's excited to get married. She thinks her life is going to change. It's not, I don't think this is a black or white or good or evil kind of thing. I think that the ultra religious world in any religion makes it hard for a lot of people, women and men. And there are some people who are happy in that, and then there are some who are not. And unfortunately, there is no alternative for the ones who are not, other than to possibly leave. And that's really, I think, the crux of it, right? Like, they're not taught any alternative way to think or live within it when they're not happy. We were largely inspired by a piece of research we found about the so-called VAD that exists in Williamsburg. And it's these kinds of, it started out as these kinds of, like, by all intents and purposes, like thugs who women could hire to get gets from their husband.
Let me just interrupt for just a second. VAD means committee or like a group of, in this case, it sort of means like a mafia kind of a group that is counted on to either ensure someone gets a divorce or that someone comes back, or they're enforcers, I guess is the word.
And we read this really great profile of a group of guys who helped women actually get gets from their husband, but the more time progressed, men also hired them to do stuff with their wives, and so we were really, that blew our mind, and that's kind of where the inspiration for Moishe concretely came from, right? But Moishe also represents the lawyers, right, who work for the husbands and or wives and don't give their partners a divorce, right? It's the people who it's the voices in the head as well as the intimidators. And you know, I mean, communities, you know, like this, like let's say the Satmars, they exist, they can exist because of you know, it's similar to you know, it's a bit cultish. It's this idea that you can't poke it or else everything will explode, that you kind of keep the performance alive, that you keep the image of it alive, and if you start asking too many questions, you know, they will, you know, you will get intimidated and you will made to feel small, and you know, that's the whole thing, why once you start asking those questions, it makes it harder to exist in those in a community like that, right? Just drink the Kool-Aid and exist that way. But and that's why, you know, Moishe very much represents a metaphor, but also, you know, these kinds of people. It's one character who could have been many characters.
I want to get on to a couple other questions. Sari Earl is that what struck her was the cloud of the Holocaust. I mean, the Satmar Hasidim were in fact have infused the Holocaust into their every way, into their every cell. But Sari writes, one thing that struck me was the cloud of Holocaust hanging over the need to keep the community separate, or to keep that community in itself. Explain the juxtaposition of that and then so much of the story happening in modern Germany.
In a way, us having it set in modern Germany, we wanted to kind of double down, bring her to the origin of the trauma, right? And you know, I grew up Jewish in Germany, so I feel like, to me, often there are these moments in Berlin where you just really feel like you're surrounded by the ghosts of the past. And I mean, that's like what trauma is, you know, you'll have a fun day at the lake and just one little thing can kind of just bring images of the past, even if you didn't live that past, even if it's just in your inherited DNA or if it's from images you've seen in documentaries, right? Of course, a lot of the myth making in Hasidic Judaism is the idea that God punished us Jews for the Holocaust, for assimilation. He punished us with the Holocaust for assimilation. So if we don't dress like the rest of the world, and if we speak Yiddish, and if we keep insular, we won't get punished again.
And so, take on the obligation to make babies to replace what was lost, which is very much a part of that mentality. It's interesting. Sarah Murphy said that she found Yael's character very interesting. Mm-hmm. Yael is Jewish, but didn't seem here it says, but didn't seem to play as much a direct foil to Esti as Moshe's character was. Was that intentional, and how did you imagine Yael role in the series?
So we really thought we needed a Yael. Just this idea that, I mean, this music school has music students from all over the world, and we really love this idea of having like a secular Jewish counterpart to Esti who's really well adjusted in this world, who just like will run into the lake ripping her clothes off in a bikini, or who like it not just goes to the club, but like, you know, is like the musical act in the club, like kind of the epitome of like confidence, coolness, talent, and who's not, who maybe, who has the Holocaust also as her history, but doesn't live the burden of it like Esty does. We thought it would make an interesting foil. But so I don't understand the question of like, why didn't we use her in the way we used Moishe? I'm not sure.
I guess as a counterweight, the secular Israeli to the counterweight of pushing her in one direction as somebody pushing her in another direction.
Right. I feel like we sort of did that. I mean, we didn't like have Yael like feed Esty pork, but but I feel like, she's part of that group that brings her to the lake. I mean, I also have to say that, like, of course, Yael is the only one of that group who immediately recognizes her as being ultra-orthodox, right?
Right.
There's that moment where one of, I think it's Robert, who's like, does she have cancer? Like, what's with the wig? And Yael is just like, she's obviously ultra-orthodox. Like,
I do not see
and
that. Yeah.
and it's like she immediately sees those signs. Like, I feel maybe a lot of secular Jews would. I mean, I live in the area of LA that has a lot of Orthodox Jews, and actually like a lot of Hasidic Jews. And when I walk down the street, I just like, you just see the signs, I don't know, and the accent and whatever. And I mean, obviously Esty had told her she lost her whole family in the Holocaust. I mean, Yael puts it very quickly together, but I think we didn't want to create a character in Yael who like makes Esty her science project. Like, oh my God, I feel like it was a kind of, I feel like the amount of Yael was the right amount for her.
So one of the things I noticed is that Esty went from the Satmar culture to a totally the Berlin youth culture. She was completely enveloped in another enclave, really, of enjoying the youthful side of life, because the Satmar Hasidim, you go from being a child to having children. There's none of that exploration time, at least portrayed in the show. I was particularly struck by the musicians, the young musicians who totally thrive, or not thrive, live in it, and they don't recognize that they live in their own culture too. So Catherine asked the question, the series has an all-female creative team, which is amazing. Can you speak a little bit about why that was important to you, and how that affected or impacted the production itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So for Anna and myself, it was really important to work with a female director. It just felt very natural that that's what we had to do in a way. And I mean, that was where we started. We really wanted a female director. This was there was a lot of sensitive material in the script, not only the nudity, but also just, we were thinking at that point, we hadn't met Shira yet to play Esty, but we knew that, Esty would have to go through massive transitions. There would be a lot of sensitive, hard scenes, and we just wanted a female sensitivity in directing. And Maria felt like a very natural choice. She's in Germany, she's very famous as an actress, and she is in Anna's other show, Deutschland, 83 and 86. And we both loved her movie. She made a movie called Farewell to Europe about the author Stefan Zweig, which we both really loved. So we brought her and basically her team on board for this, right? And that was the core of the creative team. But then, of course, our editorial intern was female, and like the office, Anna's office manager is female. I mean, it just kind of developed that way, like our amazing costume designer, Justine Seymour. Of course, actually, most costume designers are female in this industry, but we were so lucky to get her on board. Her daughter lives in Berlin and had just had a child, so Justine was really open to leave Hollywood to spend some time with her daughter in Berlin. So we really lucked out on getting Justine. I think that, and then of course, while we had a male DP, Wolfgang Thaler, amazing DP, his whole team was female. I mean, that wasn't our choice. That's just how he likes to work. But I think it speaks to the kind of openness and sensitivity of everybody we worked with is that it luckily felt very natural. You know, this was not like any quota choice or anything. It really felt like we had the best people, and a lot of them happened to be female, you know, and it really was great. But then of course, head of hair and makeup is Jens, a man, and you know, and he was incredible. So it's not really, yeah.
Stephen Brazina asked a question about Shira Haas, who is breathtaking in this role. I mean, that her performance is just marvelous. He writes that he's concerned that she may have looked too young for the role. And were there any concerns about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a topic we talked about when we saw her casting tape. Of course, you know, this is the thing, like Shira is 20, she turned 25 yesterday, actually. And you know, if Shira had actually been 16 years old, I feel like that would have been a larger concern. But the fact that she is in reality 25, you know, Shira has this ability to look very, very young, but then also very, very mature sometimes. It's really a question of her acting and the clothing, and you know, but we almost felt that her very youthful look was good for this role. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, when people get married off at 17, they're children. Yeah. And so I think it's good that she looked that young, actually, because when you look at real 17-year-olds, they look really young. And in fact, in TV, we're very used to 25, 20, 30-year-olds sometimes playing teenagers. And you forget that actually real 17-year-olds still look like they could be 14 or something. So, but with Shira, we got the best of both, because in reality, she is actually 25. So,
and her portrayal is just extraordinary. I think that's been a universal comment.
And let's in these 4 episodes, she needs to grow up. So I feel like we needed an arc that's also the way she looks and the way she dresses. And you know, she starts off when she meets Yankee as this very shy child almost, and until like she has the guts to leave, and like her hair gets shorn off, and it's a new Esty. So
I am given the last question here because our time has been very well used. It's amazing. This is a question coming from Kevin Fink, and I'm going to read it verbatim. Kevin says, "I'm not Jewish, but I'm a member of the American LGBT community. I keep seeing my own story and so many of my community stories reflected in Esty. Not fitting into a culture you're born into, being rejected and threatened but for having different beliefs and values, finding yourself in family in others who you don't share blood with." Have you heard this from other LGBT or similar community members who've seen Unorthodox? And was that part of your intention in the storytelling?
Yeah, we're hearing it from every community everywhere in the world. And it's the best part of having made the show 100%. And of course, like, part of the storytelling was that we need to tell a story that rings true universal. Like when you watch Esty, just the idea that it's okay. And this is like why she makes these new friends at the end of the idea, because TV is aspirational. And this idea that you can find a community even if you're not born into the community you eventually find. Sure, maybe you don't meet that community like the first week you're out, but it's okay to want that. And a new community exists for everyone. And you know, especially if you aspire to be in the arts, I have to say that for me, the artist community and the filmmaking community, those are my communities. And we wanted to give also this idea that you can, that the arts is something you can be connected to beyond your identity of gender or religion or anything. Is what you make is who you are.
Well, normally my last question would be, what are you working on now? But the world is kind of wacky. Who knows what people are working on now, or what, God willing, we'll be able to work on in the future. We look forward to welcoming you to Atlanta as part of the Atlanta Jewish Film Festival, which, not to brag, is one of the largest in the world. And again, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I learned a lot from this conversation. I'm going to go back and watch the series again with this in my mind, and hope to see you all soon.